Everybody in Reeder County had an opinion about Marlene Voss, and not one of them was kind that spring. I know because I was standing in the feed store the morning she wrote the check. $900 for 47 cows that any honest man would have called half dead. I watched Doyle at the register hold that check up to the light like it might dissolve, and I watched Marlene stare him down until he cashed it. She didn't explain herself. She never did. Folks laughed. I won't pretend I didn't smile a little myself. Because out here you don't throw money at animals that are already lost. You put them down clean and you move on. That's the mercy we're taught. But I've been ranching 40 years, and I've learned there's a difference between what looks like foolishness and what is foolishness. Sometimes you can't tell them apart until a whole year has passed, and the same men who laughed are standing at a stranger's gate with their hats in their hands. This is the part nobody tells you about being wrong. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just waits. Let me tell you what I saw. The first thing I noticed about those cows was the smell. You can tell a lot about an animal by how it smells, and these 47 smelled like neglect. That sweet rotten note of untended hoof and infected eye, the ammonia sting of a body running down. They came off the trailer slow, one at a time, and half of them didn't want to come at all. Doyle's boy had to push. A brindle heifer went down on the ramp and just lay there, ribs going like a bellows, and I thought, well, there's one that won't see Sunday. I'm getting ahead of myself. My name's Emmett Crane. I run 400 head on a lease north of the Voss place, and I've known Marlene since she was a girl in pigtails throwing rocks at her daddy's bull. Her father ran that ranch hard and mean and made money doing it, and when he died the county figured Marlene would sell. She was 44, unmarried, and by every measure that mattered to the men at the feed store, alone. A woman running 600 acres by herself was a story they were already writing the sad ending to. So when the auction came through with a lot of 47 salvage cattle, drought cows, the kind ranchers dump when they can't afford to feed what won't produce, nobody expected Marlene to bid. Those animals were rejects. Pulled off a failed operation 2 counties over, dehydrated, wormy, some of them pregnant, and none of them worth the trouble of calving out. The auctioneer practically apologized for putting them up. Marlene bought the whole lot, $900, about $19 a head. I remember Roy Tillett leaning over to me and saying, she just bought herself 47 funerals. And a couple men laughed, and I, God forgive me, I laughed too, because it was funny in the way a thing is funny before you understand it. She trailered them home over 3 days. I saw her truck going back and forth on the county road, dust hanging in the air behind her like something following. And I'll be honest, I watched more than I should have. Curiosity's my worst habit. My late wife used to say I'd have made a terrible cat, always sticking my nose where it'd get bit. I keep a little notebook in my breast pocket, have for years, where I jot down things I want to remember, weather, calving dates. The odd thought, that week I wrote down, MV bought the salvage lot. 47 head. Everyone says she's lost it, watch what she does. I don't know why I wrote watch what she does. Something about the way she'd stared Doyle down, maybe. A person who knows they're being laughed at and does the thing anyway, that's either a fool or someone who sees a thing you can't. I wanted to know which. The first week, 3 cows died. I know because I drove past and saw her dragging one out to the bone pile behind the old loafing shed, a chain around its back legs and her little tractor straining. She wasn't crying. She was just doing it, jaw set, and when the carcass slid free, she stood there a second with her hands on her hips looking at it. Then she went back for the others. Roy said, told you, 44 to go. He said it like a man winning a bet. But here's the thing I couldn't stop turning over. If you buy salvage cattle to flip them, to fatten and sell quick, you cut your losses the second they start dying. You don't pour money into a sinking boat. And Marlene was pouring. I saw the vet's truck at her place twice that first week. I saw feed deliveries. Good feed, not the cheap stuff. I saw her out in that pen at 5 in the morning, and I saw her out there at 10 at night with a headlamp, moving between animals like a woman visiting the sick. Which I suppose is exactly what she was. I finally stopped in. Told myself I was returning a post-hole digger I'd borrowed from her daddy years back, which was a lie so old it had cobwebs. She was in the pen when I pulled up, kneeling next to that brindle heifer, the one from the ramp, the one I'd written off. The heifer was still down, but there was a bucket beside Marlene in a rag, and she was wiping crusted discharge from the animal's eyes, slow and patient, talking to it in a low voice I couldn't make out. Didn't figure that one would last the week, I said over the fence. She didn't look up. She's got pink eye in both eyes, and she's blind right now, and she's scared. That's all. Scared and sick isn't dead. Marlene, some of these. I know what these are, Emmett. Now she looked up. She had a smear of something on her cheek and her eyes were tired in a way that goes past sleep. Everybody's told me what these are. Salvage, junk, walking dog food. She dipped the rag again. You know what they had? Nothing. No shade, no clean water, wormed once maybe in their whole lives, standing in their own filth on a dead lot while a man who quit caring waited for them to save him money by dying. Her voice didn't rise. That was the unsettling part. They're not junk, they're just nobodies. I didn't have anything to say to that. So I did the thing men do when they've got no words. I climbed the fence and asked what I could carry. We didn't talk much while we worked, and I was grateful for it. She had a system, I realized. Each animal had a number and a card in a little tin box, and on each card she'd written what was wrong and what she was doing about it. Weights, temperatures. She'd been a bookkeeper before her daddy got sick and she came home to run the place. I forget that about her, that she came from numbers before she came from cattle. It showed. She ran that pen like a hospital ward. There was a bull calf, maybe 4 months, so weak he couldn't stand to nurse. His mother had come in pregnant and calved out sick, and now the calf was fading. Marlene had rigged a sling from a boat winch and some canvas so the little thing could hang upright and take a bottle without collapsing. It was the most ridiculous, jury-rigged, tender contraption I ever saw. I watched that calf drink, and I felt something turn over in my chest that I didn't have a name for. Why? I finally asked her. Honest question, you're a smart woman, you know the math on this. Feed, vet your time, you'll never make that back on $19 cows, even the ones that live. She was quiet a while, the calf slurped. Somewhere a cow lowed low and another answered. My daddy, she said, put down a horse of mine when I was 11, good horse. Broke a leg in a gopher hole, and yeah, I know you can't fix that, I'm not saying he was wrong. She wiped her hands on her jeans. But he made me watch, said it'd toughen me up, said sentiment was how you go broke in this business. She looked out over the pen, all those bony backs and dull coats. And he was right. He never went broke. He also never once in his whole life that I saw did a single thing that cost him something for no reason but that it was kind. The wind moved through, and I smelled dust and iodine and cattle. I'm not trying to prove him wrong, she said. He's dead, he doesn't care. A short breath that wasn't quite a laugh. I just wanted to find out if I could do a thing my way one time and have it not be stupid. Even if everybody says it's stupid. She looked at me, and there was that same flat challenge she'd given Doyle at the register. Is that a good enough reason? No, I said honestly, but it's an honest one. That got a real smile out of her, small and quick, gone before it settled. I wrote in my notebook that night, she's not doing it to be right. She's doing it to find out who she is when nobody's making her be somebody else. That's either the bravest thing I ever saw or the loneliest. I still don't know which, maybe both. Maybe those are closer together than we let on. The dying didn't stop all at once. 2 more went in the 2nd week, 1 in the 3rd. Each time I'd hear about it, the county telegraph being what it is, which is to say a bunch of men at the feed store with too much time, and each time Roy or somebody would tally it up like it was proof of something. That's 6. That's 7. As if the deaths were the whole story, as if the ones still standing didn't count. But the ones still standing were changing. I saw it first in the coats. A sick cow's coat is dull and staring, the hair standing off like it's given up too. Around week 4, driving by, I saw shine, just a little on a few of them in the morning light. And the brindle heifer, the blind one, the one I'd buried in my head twice over, was up. Up and grazing, still moving careful, still favoring, but up. Marlene had beaten the pink eye. She'd been putting the medicine in twice a day, patching the worst eye with glue and a cloth square like a little pirate cow, and it had worked, and the heifer could see. I stopped calling them the salvage cows in my notebook. I started using Marlene's numbers. Number 12 was the brindle. Number 30 was the sling calf, who was off the sling now and butting the fence like calves do. Number 6 was a big soft-eyed cow who followed Marlene around the pen like a dog and would, I'd learn, turn out to be the best mother in the whole bunch. They were becoming animals again instead of a category. That's the thing about a name, even a number. It makes you unable to look away. By summer, 39 were alive. 39 of 47. 8 dead, and every one of those 8 had cost Marlene sleep. I knew, though she never said so. But 39 alive and getting better, and this was the part that started to shut people up, several of them pregnant and the pregnancies holding. Healthy. Because a starved cow can't hold a calf, but a fed one can, and Marlene had fed them. Roy stopped tallying. The men at the feed store found other things to talk about. And I, curious, nosy, terrible cat Emmett Crane, kept driving that road and kept writing in my little book, because I had the growing sense that I was watching the first half of something, that the story wasn't the cows getting better. The story was what those cows were going to be worth, and what that would do to a county full of men who'd laughed. But that was still months off. That was after the drought broke wrong and the thing happened that changed everything, the thing I still can't talk about without my throat going tight. I'll get to it. Let me tell it in order. The drought that had made those cows salvage in the first place didn't let go of the county easy. By July, the grass on my own place was going to straw. I was hauling water. Everybody was. It's a particular kind of dread, watching the sky come up white every morning, watching your ponds pull back from their banks and leave that cracked gray ring like a bathtub nobody scrubbed. You start doing math you don't like. How many head can I carry? What'll I have to sell? And when? And at what loss, because everybody sells at the same time in a drought, and the price falls out from under you like a trapdoor. I mention this because it's the frame for everything that came next. Understand, Marlene wasn't nursing 47 cows back to health in easy times. She was doing it in the worst summer any of us had seen in 30 years, when keeping healthy cattle alive was hard enough, when every extra mouth was a gamble. Feeding salvage cows in a drought isn't just sentiment. It's sentiment with a knife to its throat. I asked her once how she was affording it. She'd sold her father's gun collection, she told me, flat like it was nothing. Then his good saddle, tooled leather, worth more than the guns. Then she'd taken a second mortgage on 40 acres of the home place. You mortgaged land, I said, for salvage cows. I mortgaged land, she said, for what the salvage cows are going to be. I didn't understand that yet, I do now. Here's what I didn't know, and what Marlene had known from the start, known before she ever raised her hand at that auction. Those 47 cows had come off an operation that failed, but why it failed matters. The man who'd owned them, a fellow named Prewitt, hadn't failed because his cattle were bad stock. He'd failed because he was a drunk and a poor manager who'd bought good genetics and then starved them out of ignorance. Marlene had gone and looked at the paperwork. She'd traced the brands. And underneath the neglect, underneath the worms and the pink eye and the ribs, those 47 cows carried some of the best drought-adapted bloodlines in that whole part of the state. A hardy old strain bred for exactly the kind of dry, mean country that was killing the rest of us. Prewitt had been too far gone to know what he had. The auction crowd had seen sick cows and looked away. And Marlene, bookkeeper Marlene, numbers Marlene, who read brands and papers the way the rest of us read the sky, had seen a fortune wearing the disguise of a disaster. But you can't cash in on genetics that are dead. First, you have to keep them alive. First, you have to do the unglamorous, back-breaking, county-mocking work of turning dying animals into living ones. The bet wasn't $19 a head. The bet was a whole year of her life, and her father's guns, and 40 acres, and every ounce of pride she had, against a drought and a laughing county and her own exhaustion. That's the part the men at the feed store never grasped, even later, even when they came begging. They thought she got lucky. They thought she stumbled onto value. They never understood that she saw it when it was invisible and then paid for it in a currency most of them didn't have the guts to spend. The thing I can't talk about easy happened in August. We'd gone 60 days without rain. And then the rain came, but it came wrong. Not the slow soaking kind that saves you, but a black wall out of the west one evening that dropped hail the size of hens' eggs, and then a flash flood down the draw that ran between my place and hers. I was bringing my own cattle up to high ground when I saw Marlene's truck lights bouncing along the low fence line by the swollen creek. Her recovery pen sat on ground that had never flooded in my lifetime. But this wasn't a normal rain. The draw came up 6 feet in 20 minutes, and the water got into the low corner of her pen, and the cattle, still not strong, still not the animals they'd be, panicked and bunched against the far fence and started going down in the mud and the rising water. I don't remember deciding to help. I just remember being in the water. It was cold and moving faster than water has a right to move, full of branches and fence posts and the terrible bawling of animals who think they're dying. Marlene was already in it up to her waist, and she was doing the thing that still, to this day, is the bravest and most reckless thing I've ever watched a human being do. She was going in after them one at a time. Getting a rope on a cow, hauling, slipping, going under, coming up, hauling again. In the dark, in a flood, for salvage cows. I grabbed a cow and pulled, then another. My truck's headlights caught the whole scene in that hard white light, the rain slashing through it, and I thought, we are going to die out here for $19 cattle, and it will be the stupidest death in the history of Reeder County, and I do not care. We got most of them out. We got them scrambling up the muddy bank to the high side of the pen, and they stood there shaking, and we kept going back for the ones still trapped. Number 6, the soft-eyed cow, the dog follower, the one that was going to be the best mother, had gone down in the deepest part, tangled in the bottom wire where the fence had washed. She was pregnant, heavy, and she was drowning. Marlene went for her. I grabbed her arm. I actually grabbed her in the flood, and I yelled. I don't remember what, something about it being one cow, something about the water still rising, something about how you don't die for livestock, that being the first commandment they carve into you out here. You don't die for livestock. And Marlene looked at me with the water running off her face and the fear plain in her eyes. She wasn't fearless, that's what I need you to understand. She was terrified, and she said, "She's not livestock, she's mine." I told her I'd take care of her. Then she pulled loose and went under. I won't stretch this out. I've never been able to. Marlene got a rope on number 6, went down twice doing it. The second time she was under long enough that I started into the deep water after her with my heart clean stopped in my chest. But she came up, sputtering, the rope in her fist, and between the two of us and my truck's winch we dragged that cow out of the bottom wire and up the bank into the rain. Number 6 lived. So did her calf, born 3 weeks later, healthy, in a clean, dry pen under a clear sky, like the flood had never happened. But we lost 4 that night. 4 cows down in the water we couldn't reach in time. Marlene had saved 39, and now she was back to 35, and I found her at dawn sitting in the mud by the bone pile, soaked through, shaking, staring at nothing. I sat down in the mud next to her, didn't say anything. There wasn't anything. After a long while she said, in a voice scraped down to nothing, "My daddy would have said I got what I deserved, playing hero for junk cows." "Your daddy," I said, "isn't here, and he was wrong about most things that mattered." She started to cry then. Not pretty. The ugly, heaving kind that comes up from somewhere you keep locked. And I, 61 years old, a widower who hadn't touched another person in kindness since I buried my wife. I put my arm around Marlene Voss's shoulders and let her shake against me while the sun came up over a county that had spent a whole spring laughing at her. I wrote in my notebook later, when my hands were steady, she went under for a cow because she gave her word. I don't know what to do with that. I don't think there's anything to do with it except remember it. I've remembered it, it's why I'm telling you this. After the flood, something shifted in me, and I think in the county too, though slower. Because word gets around, not the way Marlene would have wanted, not the careful truth of the bloodlines and the bookkeeping, but the wild version, the good story version. You hear Marlene Voss near drowned pulling cattle out of the flood, went under 3 times, for those salvage cows, and even the men who'd laughed the hardest got quiet hearing it, because whatever you think about a person's judgment, you can't argue with what they'll bleed for. Courage shuts up a room faster than anything. The cattle finished healing, that fall like they had something to prove. By first frost you couldn't have picked them out of a premium herd. Slick coats, good weight, bright eyes. The blind heifer, number 12, threw a bull calf so stout and correct that I stood at the fence and just looked at him for 10 minutes. The sling calf, number 30, grew into the kind of yearling you build a herd around. And the pregnancies, nearly all of them held. That winter and into the next spring, 30-some cows that a county of experts had called walking dog food dropped a calf crop of drought-hard, correct, beautifully bred calves onto ground that was still recovering from the worst dry spell in a generation. Which brings me to the part where the ranchers came begging. Because the next spring the drought didn't break, it doubled down. And suddenly every man in Reeder County was staring at a herd that couldn't take the dry, soft cattle, bred for fat years, dying in the field, and looking across the fence at Marlene Voss, who had 35 head and a barn full of calves that could go a week on bad water and thin grass and come out the other side fat. They came to her gate with their hats in their hands, the same men, Roy Tillett first, which I'll never let him forget. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. Let me tell you how it went. Let me tell you what she did when they came, because that, more than the flood, more than the auction, is the part of this story I think about when I can't sleep. That's the part where I found out who Marlene Voss really was. It wasn't what any of us expected. Roy Tillett came to Marlene's gate on a Tuesday in April, and I happened to be there, because by then I was there most days, though I'd have told you at the time it was about the cattle. Roy had lost 40 head that spring. His herd, good commercial cattle he'd bought fat and papered, was melting in the drought. Cows too soft to forage the thin range, calves dying, the whole operation he'd spent 30 years building coming apart in a single dry season. And he stood at Marlene's gate turning his hat in his hands like a boy at the principal's door, and he asked her, Roy Tillett, who'd said 47 funerals right into my ear at that auction, if she'd sell him some bred heifers off her salvage herd. The salvage herd, he didn't call it that, he called it your drought stock, real careful. Marlene let him stand there a good while. I watched her face and I couldn't read it, and I'd gotten pretty good at reading her by then. You laughed at me, she said finally, not angry, just stating it like a weather report. Roy went red. Marlene, Everybody laughed. You told Emmett I'd bought 47 funerals. She tipped her head at me. He told me not to be cruel, he tells me things. Roy shot me a look and I gave him nothing back, because it was true and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. I'm not here to, Roy started and stopped and started over, and what came out was the truth, which cost him something. I'm here because you were right and I was wrong and my cattle are dying and yours aren't. I got kids to feed, Marlene. I got a note at the bank. He looked at the ground. You want me to say it, I'll say it, I'm begging, that's what this is. And here's where I found out who she was. Because I'll be honest with you, some ugly little part of me wanted her to make him crawl, wanted her to name a price that bleed him the way the county had bled her pride all that long spring. I think I'd have understood it if she had. Spite's a natural thing. It's earned sometimes. Marlene was quiet a long moment, then she opened the gate. I'm not going to sell you heifers, she said, and Roy's face fell, and then she kept going. The genetics only work if you know how to keep them. You buy 10 head off me and manage them like you manage the rest, they'll die too, and you'll tell everybody my stock's no good. She stepped through the gate and stood beside him, looking out at her cattle, slick and fat and impossible on that dying ground. I'll do better than sell you cows. I'll show you how I did it, all of you, whoever wants to come. I'll show you the feeding, the worming schedule, the bloodlines, the water, all of it. A pause. Free. Roy stared at her. Free. My daddy died rich and alone with a barn full of secrets he'd never share because he thought knowing more than the next man was the whole point. She said it without heat, which is the only way to say a thing that true. I found out this year that isn't the point. The point is 35 cows that were supposed to be dead are alive, and there's not one good reason to sit on how while my neighbors go under. She looked at Roy. You laughed at me. I don't much care anymore. Bring a notebook. She held the first meeting in her barn 2 weeks later, and I have never in my life seen anything like it. 30 ranchers came. 30. Men who'd mocked her, men who'd never spoken to her, men who'd figured she'd sell out and disappear. They sat on hay bales and overturned buckets in that barn, hats in their laps, and Marlene Voss stood at the front with her tin box of cards and her mortgaged land and her 35 living miracles in the pen outside, and she taught them. She taught them what she'd learned from the ground up that terrible, beautiful year. Which bloodlines to chase and how to read a brand back to its origin. How to bring a starved animal back without killing it with kindness. Because you can, she said, you can founder a starving cow by feeding it wrong, and she'd nearly done it, and here's how you don't. She taught the worming and the water and the shade. She taught the numbers, the cards, the boring holy discipline of writing down what's wrong with an animal and what you did about it, and whether it worked. And she didn't pretty it up. She told them about the 8 that died in the first weeks by number, by what she'd gotten wrong. She told them about the 4 that drowned. I watched her tell 30 hard men about going under in that flood, and I watched 30 hard men look at their boots, and I understood that she was giving them the one thing my whole life on the range had taught me was rarest. She was telling them the truth about her failures so that they could do better than she had. Roy Tillett took notes like his life depended on it, which I suppose it did. They bought cattle from her in the end, but it wasn't begging by then, and it wasn't charity, and it wasn't triumph either. It was neighbors. She sold bred heifers to a dozen operations that spring at a fair price, not the fortune she could have held out for, not the revenge price, but fair, and she sold them with a promise attached, call me if one gets sick. And they called, and she went. That drought-hard bloodline is all over Reeder County now. You can see it in the pens up and down the county road, cattle that shrug off a dry summer that would have killed their granddaddies. Men who never credit anybody credit the Voss line without always remembering where it came from. Out of a failed drunk's neglect. Through a salvage auction nobody else would touch. Kept alive by one stubborn woman in the worst year in 30, and given away for free in a barn to the same men who'd laughed. Marlene made her money back, more than back. The 40 acres came off the mortgage. She bought her daddy's guns back from the fellow she'd sold them to, and then, this is the truest thing I know about her, she sold them again on purpose and gave the money to Prewitt's widow, the drunk's widow, the woman whose husband had starved those cows in the first place. Because the widow had nothing and Marlene had by then enough. I asked her why. Of course I asked her why, nosy to the last. She thought about it. Those were her cows before they were mine, she said. She lost everything and I built something out of it. Didn't seem right to keep all of it. A small shrug. And I don't want my daddy's guns. I only bought them back to see if I could. Turns out I could. That was enough. I married her the following fall. I didn't plan to tell you that. It's got nothing to do with the cows, and Marlene would say I'm making the story about the wrong thing, dragging a sentimental old man's happy ending into it. But I've been sitting with this notebook, 40 years of little entries, weather and calving dates and the odd thought, and I flipped back the other night to that first one. MV bought the salvage lot. Watch what she does. I watched what she did. I'm still watching. That's how it worked out. Number 6 is still alive, old now, the soft-eyed cow Marlene went under for. She follows Marlene around the place same as ever. Number 12, the blind heifer, threw 11 calves before we retired her to the good pasture to live out her days fat and useless, which Marlene says is the highest honor a cow can earn. Number 30 is a herd sire 2 counties over now, and men pay real money for his calves. The men who laugh don't laugh anymore. Some of them are ashamed still and go quiet when the auction comes up. Roy Tillett named a daughter after her. Not many people know that. Marlene pretends she doesn't know I know. People ask me sometimes, strangers mostly, folks who have heard the story secondhand and want the neat version. They ask what the lesson is, what Marlene Voss proved. And I never have a good answer because I don't think it's the kind of thing that folds down into a lesson. It wasn't about proving her daddy wrong. It wasn't about the money, though the money came. It wasn't even really about the cows. I think it was about a woman who'd spent 44 years being told what a fool she'd be if she ever once did a kind thing that cost her something. And who decided, on a spring morning at a feed store, with a whole county watching and laughing, to find out for herself. She spent $900 to find out. She's never once told me she regrets it. Not through the 8 that died, not through the flood, not through the mortgage or the guns or the long, dry year. The other morning I found her out at the fence in the early light, just standing, watching the herd move across ground that's green again, finally, after all this time. I asked her what she was thinking about. She didn't answer for a while, just watched the cattle, her cattle, breathing out steam into the cold. Then she said something I've been turning over ever since, and I'll leave it with you the way she left it with me, because some things you're not supposed to explain.